Jingiwala with a bayan. That means hello, how are you all in Bunjalung? My name's Mykaela Saunders, and I'm a Koori and Lebanese writer who belongs to the Tweed Guru community. I'm also the editor of This All Come Back Now, an anthology of First Nations speculative fiction out with UQP. And I'm delighted to be here for a discussion of my anthology and to talk about some other books as well. So I'm here on the stream thanks to the support of the Copyright Agency's Cultural Fund Awards funding to better reading. And I want to mention the 4 other books for this from this funding round. So they are The Signal Line by Brendan Colley, The Rivermouth by Karen Herbert, Permafrost by S.J. Norman, and the final book is Unknown, a refugee story by Akuch Anieth. This one came on my radar a few days ago, actually. Sydney Writers Festival held a debutante ball on Sunday night for writers whose books have only just come out in the preceding months. And I was lucky enough to be invited. And the author of Unknown, Akuch Anieth, was there too. And I saw her book for sale alongside mine on the table. So it's described as a moving, confronting, and ultimately uplifting story about a young girl's escape with her family from war-torn South Sudan to Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and then to Australia. Anieth's Unknown is a remarkable memoir. It's a homage to the strength of her mother in protecting her family against all odds, a story of sadness, anger, humour, determination, survival, and love. So you can see why I want to read it. Hello to everyone who's on the stream already. Another book that's pinged on my radar recently is The Murder Rule by Dervla McTiernan, which is Better Reading's Book of the Week. I've heard it's good, and so I plan to hunt that one down too. Hello, everybody. Just lots of hellos at the moment. So I've actually, around me, you can't see, I've got a million piles of books around me that I want to talk about. I've got books I just finished. I've got books that I'm reading right now or just started, books that actually inspired this anthology. And I even want to talk about my favorite ever book that inspired me to write in the first place when I started a few years ago now in 2017. So maybe I'll start by talking about books I just finished. So one I finished literally last night is Australiana by Yumna Kassab. Now this one was sent to me by who's it? Ultimo Press, because I was supposed to be on a panel with Yumna at Sydney Writers Festival talking about climate fiction. Yumna wasn't able to come, so I didn't get to meet her, which is probably lucky for her because I would have just been gushing at her. This is such an incredible book. Has anyone read it or want to read it? No. Others. Who are we reading? We've got After I Do by Taylor Jenkins, Force of Nature by Jane Harper, Life or Death by Michael Robotham, The Tailor's Girl, Transcendent Kingdom. There's lots of different books here. Yeah. So anyway, about this one, it's sectioned off into 4 sections, and my favorite was the first. It's called The Town, and each very short chapter is just like a vignette, which gets inside the head of a different character. And in this way, you kind of move around the town by going into the heads of all the townsfolk, and it's just really incredible and clever. And there's some the third section is a kind of like a bush horror. It's very intense and very well written. Anyway, for people who are interested in that kind of thing, I recommend it. I think Yumna is incredibly talented, and I actually, on the strength of that, I want to go and hunt down her first book, The House of Yusef, which I haven't read yet. Wow, you're all such big readers. I'm just reading all your comments. None of them are in my piles, so let's go on with the next one. So I'm also reading, I just finished also Unlimited Futures. So this is another, Indigenous and Black um, anthology, and it was edited by Ellen Van Neven, who has a story in my anthology, and Rafif Ismail. And it's a it's a little bit different to my anthology in that it's written, well, the stories are from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writers, but also writers from the African diaspora. So it's a bit of a mixture there. Um, and there's actually a few writers that are in both, and some of those are, who have we got? Lisa Fuller, who wrote Ghostbird, if anyone's read that. Laniuk, Jasmine McGackie, who's an incredible Torres Strait Islander writer. Mariana Salem, who, like myself, is also Aboriginal and Lebanese. And I had the pleasure of meeting them at Sydney Writers Festival. We had a panel a few days ago, and it was the first time I met Mariana, and they were just so great. It was so funny. Alison Whittaker's also in both anthologies, and so am I, and so are Ellen. So yeah, there's a bit of a crossover. So that's those two. Yeah, I really enjoyed this anthology because there was a variety of kind of genres and modes. It wasn't just all short fiction. There was even some poetry, and some, yeah, it was just a different kind of, different to what I'm usually reading when it comes to anthologies. And I do tend to read a lot. Okay, I have a question. What is the best book I've read this year? You know what? I've got a really bad memory, but I keep notes. So I'm actually gonna. What was the best one I read this year? Oh, okay. I read La Rose by Louise Erdrich, and I'd already read a few of her other novels, so that was my first time with La Rose, and it was incredible. It absolutely broke me, in a good way. It was just an incredible premise for a story, but as you know, if you've read any of Louise Erdrich's work, it's not just what the story is; it's how she tells the story. She's just so good at it. Yeah, so okay, so that was two of my books. Another book I finished very recently is Gentle and Fierce, which is a collection of essays by Vanessa Berry. Um, all of these essays are about an animal or some animals that have played some role in Vanessa's life, and I think it's a really sweet book. I th- I think, just like the title, the writing is quite gentle and fierce as well. Um, and as with all anthologies, you always pick a few favorites. And my favorite essay is called Mink Coat, and it's about a mink coat that used to hang in the family wardrobe, and how Vanessa, when she was little, she experienced it as a presence, and how by tracing the kind of history of the mink coat, she was tracing the history of her family, which was very interesting history. Her grandmother was a Jew from Baghdad, and then they ended up in Shanghai, and then they came to Australia. So very interesting. And I mean, all the essays are great, but I just personally love that one because I love family history stuff. So there are three I finished recently. Okay, I'm gonna go through some questions here. So Emma Fitzgerald absolutely adored Ghostbird by Lisa Fuller. It was so good, absolutely. I agree. I actually read it years ago, but I lent my copy to my niece, who hasn't given it back yet. And so I picked up another copy recently, and I'm rereading it just because I want to write some of my own horror, and I think the best way to write your own stuff is to read what great writers in the field are doing, and she's so great. Okay, I have a question. How did I decide on authors for my anthology? From Jane. That is a really good question. So I had a call for submissions last year. If you can believe it, this time a year ago, I was reading stories. So I hadn't even decided on the stories. I had a call for submissions that was open for about 4 months. And I wanted it open for a long time because I know people are busy. And people were very busy last year during our second pandemic year. So it was a mixture of things. I had a lot of people send me stories, but I also emailed a lot of people that like a lot of people whose writing I already admired, or people who I knew wrote speculative fiction, just to let them know about the opportunity. And actually a lot of people sent me stories. I think I read like almost 60 pieces to consider for this, and I chose 21. So, yeah, there was quite, I think all my hustling paid off. Yeah, so how did I choose them? I really just, I was, okay, so four of the stories in here are actually extracts from longer works, and I've got some of these works here. So I have a bit from the Swan book from Alexis Wright. So this is set in the future, and it's very surrealist, kind of magical realist. And I read this years ago, and I always knew I wanted an extract in here. So I emailed Alexis Wright. She was actually the last person I emailed because I was terrified, because she's just the best writer. And but she said yes, and she was very lovely. So we've got an extract of that in there. I also emailed Ellen Van Neerven because in this collection, Heat and Light, which won the David Inaipon Award in 2013, there's a novella in the middle, and it's called Water, and it's set in the future as well. And I wasn't able to include the whole novella, but with Ellen, like working with Ellen, we shortened it. And we used a bit that was focused on the relationship between the human and the plant person. So for those of you who haven't read it, and that sounds weird, it is a weird story. It's also a very sensual story. So that was another. So I chose that because I read it years ago and I loved it. And when I had this anthology in mind, I really wanted to. I wanted to include some of the more seminal works that had already been published. I didn't want to just start from scratch, because so much of our great spec fic has already been published. Another extract is from Archie Weller's Land of the Golden Clouds. Now, most people know Archie as a writer of realist or naturalist fiction. He's won a lot of awards for his work, like The Day of the Dog. But this is a sci-fi fantasy story that he wrote in 1998, and I read it years ago as well. And a funny story about how I came to contact Archie Weller. So I asked my publisher if they had an email address for him, and they said no. He doesn't have a computer. Here's his address. So I wrote him a letter. I wrote him a snail mail letter. I sent it off. A few weeks later, I got a reply for him, and he was very lovely. And he said, yes, I can include some of his work in the anthology. And then right at the end, he said, I don't know why you're writing to me this way. Here's my email address. So he actually does. The way I'd imagined him, he was this hermit without any technology, and he, wrote everything by hand. But actually, we've been emailing since, and we just talk about science fiction and stuff like that. It's really nice. So that's another story that comes out of that, Land of the Golden Clouds. And another extract is from this book. It's called The Kadaitcha Sung, and it's by Uncle Sam Watson, who passed away a few years ago. He was an incredible activist and author. And this is actually the first ever Aboriginal speculative fiction book that's ever been published. And it was in 1990. And it's a very weird tale. And critics who were reading it at the time didn't know how to take it, because it's this mishmash of like urban fantasy, dystopia, magic. There's lots of different things in it. Anyway, so Uncle Sam passed away, so I wasn't able to ask him, but I was able to ask his son, Samuel Wagon Watson, who is an incredible poet in his own right. And he was really flattered. He was very happy that I asked him that. And through talking to him, I actually included one of his stories in there too. So we have a story by father and son in the anthology. It's really nice. And so that's a few of the ones that I chose. And then, of course, others just sent me stories, and I got some really incredible stories. It was pretty hard to choose, but you have to make your decisions. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's see what questions we've got up here. Thanks for asking that, Jane. That's actually a nice question. Julie Ascari says, I have her book, The Night Watchman. So Louise Ojich again. Yeah, so good. I haven't read that one yet, but I do want to check it out because she's just such an incredible writer. What else? And Emma says, speculative fiction is so wonderfully broad. There's always something to love about it. I agree. Yes, it is such a huge basket. And within that basket, there are all these other genres. So you can have like magical realism, full-blown fantasy, science fiction, all kinds of things. And I really do think there's something for everyone. I've had a lot of feedback about this anthology, actually. A lot of people are saying, I didn't know what speculative fiction was before reading it. And they realize that they've loved it all along, but they didn't realize that there was this term for it. So that's been really nice. Yeah. Okay, so I've gone through a couple of those books. And I want to talk about some of the ones that I'm reading at the moment. So we already said Ghostbird. Now I'm only reading this during the daytime because it's terrifying at night, for those of you interested. I'm a big fraidy cat, so that's a daytime book for me. Tar Cut Away by Josephine Rowe. These are stories. Josephine Rowe is an incredible short story writer and novelist, but these stories are just incredible. And I've read them before, but it was a long time ago, and so I'm rereading them. I'm someone who, my favorite kind of reading is rereading. I love getting back to a story and like finding new things about it. Okay, so that's another one. Another one I'm rereading is Portable Curiosities by Julie Coe. Again, I read this, I think 2018 or something like that. And I'm rereading it because I'm writing some of my own kind of satirical absurdist. Like I said with Lisa's, if you want to write that kind of stuff, you need to learn from the masters. And Julie Coe is an absolute genius. She's very funny and she's very clever, and I just love what she does. So that's that. What else have we got? Oh, the new issue of the Griffith Review. So this is issue 76, Acts of Reckoning. I have an essay in here, so I was sent this one. But I'm reading all the other essays in here, and I'm learning a lot, actually. My essay is about time and how time works in Indigenous cultures and versus Western cultures, and what the kind of tensions are between the two. I recently read. It's not in here. Where is it? Oh, here it is. It's an essay called Blood and Bone by Alice Billette, and it's called Unsettling the Settler in Aboriginal Gothic. And now, as someone who's very interested in Aboriginal Gothic and horror and stuff like that, I found it an incredible essay. There's lots of stuff in here, if that's your thing. And finally, I just got sent this one yesterday. So this is Anita Heiss's latest novel. It's called Billa Yarudangalang Dure, which translates from Wiradjuri to River of Dreams. And I'm excited to read this because I'm actually going to be interviewing Anita about the book at Bellingen Writers Festival in a few weeks. So reading this and going to figure out some things to pick out of the story to ask her about. But basically, it's historical fiction, so it's based on a big flood that happened from the Murrumbidgee at Gundagai, which is Wiradjuri country. And so very interested to read that one. Now, should I go back through some questions? Oh, I've just realized, actually, this is our time's nearly up here. So I am going to wrap this up. I'm going to thank you, though, for all your wonderful questions and coming to have a chat and hang out with me today. I hope you check out some of the books that I have held up and talked about, and definitely this one if that's your thing. And yeah, thank you all, and